I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life, never the full version, and never to anyone who actually rode in my car. Because if you were sitting in the back seat with me that night, you would understand why I still check my rearview mirror even when the car is empty. It happened at 2:43 a.m., a time I've started to hate, a time I now avoid like an anniversary no one celebrates. What I remember first isn't the passenger. It's the shift in the air, how the heater, which had been blowing steady for 20 minutes, suddenly felt like it was struggling against something colder than the night outside. Small thing, right? Except I hadn't opened a window, and the temperature on the dash didn't change. Before I go any further, you should know this. I'm not new to the job. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 61. I've spent 12 years driving late-night shifts. I've worked storms, blackouts, abandoned streets, and the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring because there's nothing else to hear. Nothing has ever rattled me. Until that ride. It was supposed to be routine. Short trip, familiar neighborhood, nothing unusual on the map. But the moment I accepted the request at 02:15, the app froze for a second. Not crashed, not glitched, just stopped, like something was waiting for me to make a choice. And when the passenger finally opened the door, slowly, like they were making sure I heard it, the first thing they said wasn't hello or Harold or even the address. It was, "You're late." I didn't recognize the voice, but the voice recognized me. And that was the beginning of the night I've never been able to put behind me. That night began like many others. A raw wind had come through the city all evening, a thin sleet glazed the roads and made the streetlights smear like wet paint. I was on my way back from a grocery run, the car still smelling faintly of coffee and freezer pizza when the app chimed. Pick up in 3 minutes, near an intersection I drove past almost every shift. I confirmed, turned the heater up a notch against the cold, and pulled to the curb. The passenger was an older woman, maybe mid-70s, wrapped in a cardigan with a faded floral pattern. She walked slowly, but without a visible limp, carrying a small cloth handbag. Her hair was silver and neatly pinned, and she had on a thin wedding band. Her face was the kind of face that had settled into itself, quiet, lined, with a neutrality you'd see on 1,000 strangers at dawn. She got in without fuss, sat in the center of the back seat, and gave me a soft, polite thank you when I slid back into the driver's seat. I did the checks I do with every passenger at night. I confirmed the name against the app's display. I asked if the destination was still correct. I mentioned the route. I usually take Elm for the lights, and she nodded. Nothing about her breath, her posture, or her hands warned me. She smelled faintly of lavender. Her eyes closed for a moment as if she'd already started drifting. The pickup was at 02:15, the route estimated at roughly 20 minutes. The streets were nearly empty. The city at that hour is a patient thing that moves slow. The heater sang steady. The GPS voice, robotic, flat, told me to head left, then merge. I remember the sound of tires on damp pavement, the gentle staccato of the windshield wipers, the distant rumble of a delivery truck 2 blocks over. I remember looking in the rearview mirror to check the back seat in the way drivers do, the way we watch for seat belts or open doors. Her head was bowed, the cardigan bunched at the shoulders like she was trying to keep warm. At 02:43, 28 minutes into what should have been a 20-minute drive, I heard it. Harold, a whisper, soft as breath across a pillow, came from behind me. I almost laughed out loud because it sounded so absurd, a name called in that hushed conspiratorial way you might use with a sleeping child. For a half second, I thought she was speaking to someone in the seat beside her. Then I remembered there wasn't a seat beside her. For a moment, I thought maybe the GPS had said a street but sounded like a name. Then I listened to the heater, to the wet hiss of the tires, and thought I could pick out nothing at all that would explain that voice saying my name. Have you ever had that split second where something could be explained away and you reach for the plausible answer because it's safer?
My brain reached for tiredness. I'd been up long enough. The edges of fatigue make things warp. Maybe the wind outside had made the car sing in a particular way. Maybe it was the radio. There was nothing on the radio but a late-night talk station. The voice could have come from a caller on speaker through someone's phone, or a neighbor who happened to be calling my name from the sidewalk. Plenty of sensible options. I didn't want to make a fuss. I kept my hands steady on the wheel. I asked, "Ma'am, did you say something?" No answer. The cardigan shifted, a small movement like a settling animal. I watched the rearview mirror. Then the hand moved. Not a twitch, not the small reflexive jerk people make when they shift their weight. A deliberate, slow lift. The fingers lifting away from the seat as if to reach for the back of the driver's headrest. The movement was coordinated. A head turned, chin tilting, eyes opening as if to focus. The lighting in the car was dim. A street light at the next corner was the only soft brightness catching the outline of her face. And in that dim, I could see her head turn, and, under the cardigan, the hand rise. I killed the engine. For drivers, shutting off the engine mid-ride is a rare escalation. You do it if you need to collect your wits, talk, or check something urgently. I remember the sudden small silence that followed shutting the engine. The absence of heater vibration, the way the heater fan stopped, and the car became a quiet shell.
My hands felt like they were out of body as I looked at the woman in the back through the mirror. The hair at the back of my neck prickled. My mouth moved. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her eyes were open now, and she smiled a little, the kind of smile people give when they want to be polite but are somewhere else. "Yes," she said, and it didn't sound like the voice that had said Harold. It was slow, habitual. She put her hand back in her lap and folded her fingers in a way that made it look like she hadn't moved at all. "I don't do confrontations. I've always been one to diffuse, remove myself, call a dispatcher if something seems off." I reached for my phone with a hand that trembled just enough to make the screen blur. I thumbed to the app and double-checked the name. It matched. The pickup was registered at 0215. The route indicated a drop-off at Oak and 3rd, approximately 6 blocks away. The estimated drop-off time had shifted to 0247 because of a small detour a GPS had suggested. Nothing in the app would explain a voice calling my name or a deliberate movement that shouldn't have happened. I called a colleague. His name's Martin, older than me by a couple of years, used to the same streets, same night shift. Martin and I used to swap quiet stories on the radio when things got slow. I tapped his number and held the phone to my ear. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold, everything okay?" I hesitated because it felt ridiculous, but the tremor in my voice gave me away. "Martin, you ever hear something in your car?" On the other end, there was a brief rustle, then Martin's calm, slow voice. "You mean the ones that call you?" "Yeah, thought I was losing it the first time. You good?" This is the moment where I want to be clear about how credibility frays when you tell a friend something strange. The first time I said, "Someone called my name," Martin laughed just a little, the kind of laugh you give someone when you think they're making light of being tired. But then he said low, "You remember that stretch by the old industrial lot? I had a ride once, same hour. Some voice called my name. Looked back, empty. Found my door ajar afterward." He never went into detail. He never offers specifics that could be checked against records, because he couldn't or wouldn't, or because remembering it unmade the memory for him. "We don't talk about it much," he said. "People think you're trying to hustle for views. Keep your head, Harold." His downplaying was both a relief and a deeper worry. If a man like Martin, practical, heavy-set, the type who'd laugh at a ghost if it wore a suit, knows something and keeps his mouth closed, what does that mean? I told her we were almost there. I told her, in a voice that I thought would sound like reassurance, that the rest of the trip would be short. She didn't respond, except for the small, polite smile again. The car sat like a bowl of warm air while the streetlights passed by in sleepy intervals. When we pulled up at the drop-off, she didn't reach for the door. She watched me in the mirror, steady as a ship's lamp.
I turned in my seat to unlock the doors with a hand that had the wrong kind of strength to it and called, "We're here." She stepped out with a grace that surprised me. No fumbling with the handbag, no staggering. She walked to the curb and turned to me as if to thank me, and then, without looking away from me, she said clearly, "Harold." I stood there with the car idling, the heater breathing warm air into the cabin, and the street was an empty throat. She crossed the sidewalk and disappeared under a street lamp into the direction the app had indicated as her destination. I sat for a minute longer, checking my screen, checking the logs. The ride receipt registered a drop-off at 02:48. The duration was 33 minutes. The fare was processed like any other. I told myself to let it go. People can be strange. Maybe she'd called my name earlier. Maybe she recognized me from a previous shift. The app logs I had were unhelpful in that regard. Names on a display don't tell you whether someone knows you by sight or sound. Still, the hair on my neck didn't settle. That word in the dark, the cadence of the voice, replayed in my head. Name is a small, intimate thing. Hearing it where it shouldn't be is a cold, thin knife. Back at home the next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked the app log again, scrolling through my history. The ride was there. Pickup 02:15, drop-off 02:48, route recorded, fare recorded. I took a screenshot and sent it to Martin with a short message. "You ever have a passenger call your name like that?" He replied with 3 shorthand texts over the course of an hour. "Yeah, twice. Not talking about it. Be careful." That was not the answer I wanted. It was the answer I expected from a man who'd been driving that night shift a long time. That kind of terse reply told me there were rules. You didn't indulge the fear, you didn't sing it loud, you kept your private ledger, and you didn't ask too many other people to sign it. The seed of the itch, the need for evidence, started there. If something weird happened, I reasoned, there might be data. Not spiritual proof, not salvation or damned souls, just data I could look at. Dashcam footage, the app's trip log, any other driver's mentions on the company forum I checked from time to time. I didn't have an interior camera at the time. I had a dashcam mounted for the front windshield, standard for liability. Most of its footage overwrote itself every few days unless I saved a clip. The front-facing camera wouldn't catch the back seat clearly. Rear-view angles are deceptive. After I'd had time to think, the nagging insistence that I should have some recording turned on settled into me like a new routine. Get an interior cam, set it to save. If this was going to happen again, I wanted something that would show what I had seen.
Not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, because the image of that hand lifting wouldn't stop visiting me otherwise. I installed an interior camera 3 nights later. Not a high-end unit, but good enough. Time-stamped, loop recording to a micro SD with a motion-triggered save feature. I tucked it under the rear parcel shelf where the dome light lived, aimed so it could pick up a broad view of back seat and rear window. I tested it. The time-stamped matched my phone's clock. The LED blinked a small, steady blue. It felt ridiculous to set up equipment as if I were investigating a minor inconvenience, but that small act felt like the only adult response to a thing that had unsettled me. I kept driving. For the first few shifts after the installation, nothing unusual happened. I felt the odd exhilaration that comes from putting up a fence against the unknown. The small comfort of a device that might stop your smallest fear from metastasizing into 1,000 monsters at night. 2 weeks later, a ride request popped up at 0210. Pick up 2 blocks from my usual spot. The app showed a single passenger, and the destination, same part of town where I'd picked up the woman that first night. This time I was adamant. Check the mirrors, check the app, check the passenger before pulling away. She was an elderly man, wearing a heavy coat. He climbed in and settled on the right side of the back seat. He didn't appear drowsy. His hands were on his knees. The heater was set low to avoid fogging the windows. The night was raw. The streetlights made puddles look like low stars. At 02:43, again that hour, the same thin voice came from the back. Harold. This time I felt less surprised and more measured. I killed the engine immediately. The man leaned back as if he had been leaning forward, and his head turned toward the mirror. He looked at me through the rear view.
He didn't move his hands. He didn't have the small things people do when they get up to leave. He spoke. "Are you all right?" "Did you say something?" I asked. He shook his head and smiled politely. I told him the ride would be short. We pulled into the drop-off point. This time, the man stepped out quietly and walked away down an alley. I sat with the car still idling and felt the air press against my closed windows like a held breath. When I checked the interior camera clip later, it told part of the story. Time code 024158. The rear camera showed the man sitting upright, hands on knees. The soundtrack had a faint low hum from the heater. At 024312, there was a shift. The man's head tilted slowly. The hand lifted, and the mouth moved. On the audio track, grainy and thin, you can hear something that might be a voice. It isn't clean, it isn't unambiguous. But 11 seconds later, there's a definitive motion in the back seat. A hand reaches toward the driver's mirror where no hand could reach without standing. I played the clip 3 times that night and knew then what I had not wanted to admit. The camera captured a motion that matched the movement I'd seen before. The audio had a whisper that might be my name. But anyone who knows recordings knows the ways the brain would like to see confirmation. The file was ambiguous enough that a skeptic could dismiss it as wind, rustle, or audio artifact. I uploaded the clip to my external hard drive and stared at the wave track until dawn. I consulted the forums. I used an alias and posted a short, restrained account. Have any drivers heard passengers call their names from the back? Something odd at 2:43. Anyone else? Within 24 hours, 3 replies came in. Not long essays, but short notes from handles I didn't recognize. Names redacted. One said, "Not the name, but yeah. Old woman on Route 12. Did it to me twice. Woke her up, she wasn't there." Another, "I put in for a different schedule after hearing it twice. Too many nights for those sounds." The third was blunt. "Don't push it. The camera footage never looks good. Saves you more trouble not to post." Those posts didn't answer anything definitively. They did, however, make me feel less insane. When 3 other people mention similar things, even if they won't say more, the phenomenon moves from a private hallucination into a pattern you can measure. Along with Martin's terse admissions, a sense of a shared, very late-night knowledge formed. Drivers had a vocabulary for the unsettling, and they didn't talk about it openly. I decided to document more carefully. I started saving every interior clip and renaming the files with the trip ID, app timestamp, and a brief note about the passenger's description. Soon I had a folder of late-night rides, 30 or 40 clips, mostly uneventful droning of tires and hum of heaters. The file from the man at 2:43 stood out, sharp as a fingernail, but it wasn't conclusive enough to show anyone without provoking more questions than answers. If I handed it to someone, they'd ask context. Have you ever met the passenger before? Was there anyone else in the car? What other sound sources could there be? Those questions had answers I couldn't reliably provide. 1 week later, I had a ride that changed the shape of the problem. The request came in at 1:58. The pickup was an assisted living facility on the east side of town. They send a lot of short rides, people to appointments and visitors. She was petite, frail-looking, wrapped in a heavy coat that didn't really keep her warm. The app name matched the tag tacked to her bag. I did the usual checks. She got in and told me the destination quietly. The trip log confirmed the pickup and route. Everything was routine. We moved through the streets, and for the first part of the ride, I watched her through the mirror as a sort of habit, not suspicion. She had a folder across her lap. Occasionally, she would open it and trace a page with a finger, as if reading something familiar. At 2:43, the voice called my name again. This time it was not a whisper, but a clear, enclosureless utterance. Harold. The hair on my arms stood out. I killed the engine and asked, "Ma'am, do you know me?" She looked at me and then down at her hands. "No," she said. Her voice sounded small. She smiled like she was embarrassed. "I'm sorry." She didn't get out at the drop-off. She instructed me to continue and told me she was tired and wanted to go home. I drove.
After I dropped her, I checked the internal camera. The clip at 2:43:05 shows her sitting. The audio track registers something like a name. The catch is the strange motion. Midway through the clip, the camera shows a second movement in the back seat, a kind of coordination that wasn't human. The woman's hands don't make it. Her shoulders don't shift. The motion seems to pass across the seat, as if something brushed along. And the focus of the small camera breaks for a second, as though something crossed the lens's view. Then the camera stabilizes. There's no figure caught on video passing from seat to seat. The audio waveform there shows a spike where the whisper might be, but it's muffled, indeterminate. It was the first time footage in my memory lined up enough to make me think the car itself, or something within it, had performed actions that didn't match the physical presence of the passenger. People told me later that cameras can lie. Reflections, lenses, and motion artifacts. A camera under the parcel shelf can pick up a sway when the heater kicks, or a lens flaring when a streetlight passes. I know that. I also know what my eyes saw and how the angles couldn't produce the alignment I witnessed. I brought the clips to Martin one evening. We met at a diner at 11:20 p.m., coffee steaming between us. I wasn't there to cajole him into believing. I wanted someone practical to graph the footage with me. Someone who could say, "That's nothing," or "You should quit." Something that would allow me to choose a direction. He sipped his coffee, watched, and said very quietly, "I don't know what that is, Harold." He pointed at the timestamp. "You sure your clock is right?" "It syncs to my phone," I said. "To the app." "Then it's odd." He folded his hands. "But Harold, when you start looking for something like that, you'll see it everywhere. You'll hear names under the rain. You'll think every creak is a person. Don't let it push you." His caution came from a place of experience. He had a point. Except my life had already tilted toward seeing it. The clips lived like a small stone in my pocket. Over the next month I kept collecting. There were small variations, voices that sounded like my name but were slightly off, passenger movement that couldn't be explained by postural adjustment, and in one case, a passenger who, when I asked if they had spoken, looked at me blankly and said, "I didn't." The forums grew a little. A handful of drivers, an alias here, a throwaway handle there, left brief notes about late-night murmurs and calls. One driver said he was checked by a med tech once after a long series of calls. They found nothing medically wrong. Another wrote that he'd stopped doing night shifts after a series of incidents, citing no further reason than, "It felt like an intrusion." I tried to bring my concerns to the company. The app had a safety feature to report incidents that felt odd or unsafe. I filed a report. Passenger voice, vehicle interior, name called 0243, multiple rides. They replied with the standard boilerplate. "Thank you for your report. We take safety seriously and will review our logs." That was all. The reply had no personal engagement. No investigator asked to see the clips. No one asked for more. If I'd wanted a human response, I didn't get it. I got an algorithmic acknowledgement that flattened the event into a ticket number. The absence of institutional curiosity is its own kind of confirmation. If something obvious were happening, if people were in immediate danger, someone would act. No one did. The company didn't escalate. The city didn't have any reports linked to these crimes. The only contacts who showed any sign of having a similar experience were other drivers in hushed subtextual posts and Martin, who admitted to having felt something but didn't want to talk about it openly. It was after a string of incidents that I made the mistake of trying to share the footage publicly. Not out of a desire for clicks, but because I wanted to ask if someone with better equipment could render the audio and tell me if that was my name or not. I uploaded a clip to a private cloud with a password and sent links to 2 drivers I trusted. One responded with a short, "Nope." The other didn't respond at all. One of them later called and said, "Harold, don't post that publicly. You don't want strangers poking at it. People will make jokes. They'll say you're after attention, or they'll say you need help. It screws up your life." He was right.
The clip drew an unpleasant mixture of dismissiveness and morbid curiosity in the small circle that did see it. The more people saw it, the more words they had to attach to it, and the more the image in my head changed into something else, not my memory anymore, but someone else's explanation from my memory. So I made a decision. I backed up the footage on an external drive, labeled the folder private, and deleted the cloud copy. Then I deleted the clip from the dashcam's protected folder. I don't know if there's guilt in that act or relief. Both are true. I didn't want to wreck my life by chasing an explanation in public. I didn't want to be the man who built a theory on fuzzy audio and a handful of forum posts. I also didn't want, for my own sanity, to have the clip sitting somewhere in the cloud where strangers could watch it and embed their reading of it into mine.
Deleting the file felt like closing a book that I didn't want to reread, but it also felt like cutting off the only thread I had back to the thing that happened. After that, I started taking fewer night shifts. I told my supervisor at the company, an easygoing woman named Teresa, who had helped me file other incident reports, that I couldn't continue nights. I cited sleep issues and a desire to switch to daytime runs. She accepted my resignation from the night roster without fuss, and there was a small office party where the guys brought cupcakes and someone made a joke about Harold finally seeing the sunrise. I smiled, thanked them, and left the party early. The men at the garage clapped me on the shoulder and said I deserved a break. I wanted to say it wasn't about the hours. I wanted to say it was about something in the car that knew my name. I didn't. Leaving the nights felt like a surrender at first. There was relief. No more 2:15 p.m. pickups, no more the creeping cold, but there was also a slow erosion in my sense of competence. Driving at night was a skill I'd honed. I'd learned to read streets by light and silence. Giving it up made me feel smaller in the world. Even so, the relief outweighed the shame. I slept better when I did sleep. The quiet outside was less full of whispers. And yet, the images crept in where they shouldn't. At the grocery store, the hum of the refrigeration unit would align with the memory of the heater in my car, and my stomach would tighten. At 2:43 most mornings, whether I slept or woke, a small pulse of panic would rise and then retreat, like the tide. The world had freckled me with triggers. A woman humming, a hand on a banister, the smell of lavender in a waiting room. Once, in summer, a neighbor's thermostat clicked in the wall, and I saw, for no rational reason, the back seat reach across to the mirror. I have not convinced myself the events were supernatural. I am not willing to say there was an otherworldly force in the car. I have considered every rational explanation. Audio artifacts, car sounds making vowels from consonants, stage whispering passengers, someone playing a trick to amuse themselves. I have asked medical professionals. My doctor checked my hearing and my sleep patterns. A neuropsychologist friend ran me through tests for auditory hallucination. None of them produced a cause. The tests were all clean. The recordings remained stubbornly ambiguous, not enough to prove anything, enough to let the memory hold. What haunts me isn't the possibility of ghosts. It's the certainty that something happened that I cannot fold into the world the way I used to. Before that night, a name called behind me would mean a friend or a mistake. After, it was like a small crack in the world I could never smooth out. The knowledge of that crack lives separate from any label we might give it. It is a private, stubborn ache. I sometimes imagine the woman in the cardigan and the others as people who are only partly present, a volume turned down on the world that we still interact with. That thought is kinder than imagining malice. But I don't know. There are moments that feel like someone tapping on the glass when what lives on the other side is too close to name. I'm cautious about saying anything that would exoticize or exploit their dignity. These were people who rode in my car at vulnerable hours, and I try to hold that with respect even as I puzzle over it. On occasion, I'll open a thread on the driver's forum under my old handle and read the cautious notes others leave. A week ago, someone wrote about a camera capturing a reflection that shouldn't have been there on an empty back seat. Another wrote, 2:43 is not my favorite time, with a string of nervous emojis.
The slips into private language are telling. Drivers use shorthand to talk about what they won't say aloud. That shorthand is also an acknowledgement of how isolated you can feel when the night gives you a gift, except it's not a gift, and you have to carry it alone. The peephole into my car at 2:43 is smaller now. I hardly ever drive after midnight anymore. But the sound, the name, arrives without invitation. Once, 3 nights ago, the power in my apartment flickered, one of those tiny neighborhood blinks that never lasts more than a second. The LED on my alarm clock hiccuped at 2:43 a.m., just like the clocks in that car. I sat bolt upright and couldn't go back to sleep for an hour. There's a cruelty to a trigger that seems mundane. A light flicker, a heater's half gasp, a neighbor's cough, small events that strike the stored memory and unmake a night. People ask me sometimes if I regret deleting the footage. Part of me says yes. Evidence is a heavy chain that can also be a lifeline. In the absence of evidence, you're left balancing on your own testimony and the few quick messages from men who don't want to talk. The other part of me knows that some truths, if displayed, become ideas that get handed around and worn thin. A public clip could be reinterpreted and reshaped into 100 different narratives, none of which would be mine. Deleting the file felt like stealing it back from the world and keeping it where only I could have it, even if that meant never proving the event to anyone else. I sometimes wonder what my wife Barbara thinks when I wake her up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. I try not to. I don't tell my daughter Patricia the details, there's no reason to load that into her life, but she knows enough to call and ask if I'm sleeping sometimes. I lie and say yes. I don't like telling people what frightens me because it makes them small and me smaller. That, I suppose, is selfish. All I can offer are facts I can measure and impressions I can describe. At 2:43 on 3 documented nights, a voice uttered something that sounded like my name while a passenger was in the back seat. In at least 2 of those instances, the interior camera recorded motion that did not match the passenger's expected range of movement. The app logs recorded the trips at the times noted, with pickups and drop-offs that matched my memory. Other drivers, under pseudonyms, have hinted at similar experiences. The company acknowledged my report as a ticket and did not escalate. Medical checks returned normal results. The footage I had I deleted because I didn't want to be part of a public theater, and because the footage, ambiguous as it was, had become a locus of dread for me. That dread sits in the small things, a heater's pitch, the time on a broken store clock, the way a back seat looks under dim light. They strike, and I'm transported. I sometimes think the car remembers us as much as we remember the car. That thought is a superstition, perhaps, but it's less frightening than thinking I'm the only one standing on the shore while something invisible moves through the water. I don't have an explanation. I don't have a proof. I don't want to sell a terrifying anecdote for fame. I only have what I've been handed by experience. A memory that refuses to fit into tidy, comfortable boxes, and a set of small, stubborn facts that point towards something I cannot name. If you are someone who drives at night, if you remember the hush, the way the city closes its eyes, and the roads sound like a different thing, then maybe you'll understand the particular kind of dread I'm talking about. If you've ever had a piece of the world shift in a way your rational mind can't account for, know that the experience is more isolating than you expect. It doesn't end with explaining it away. It lives on your nerves and makes you bow a little when a stranger calls your name. If this kind of true account interests you, if the quiet, unsolved things of the night make you want to hear more, consider subscribing. I'm telling this because other drivers and people who work the nights should be heard. At the very least, I hope sharing this does something small. It makes the experience less lonely. I will end with what I know and what I don't. What I know is the rhythm of a night ride. The app chime at 2:15, the heater's hum, the wet hiss of tires, the rearview glance, and the whisper that came at 2:43, clear enough to prick my skin. What I don't know is whether that whisper was misheard, manufactured by some acoustical oddity, or whether it was something else entirely. What I don't know is whether the motion the camera recorded was a trick of lens and light, or evidence of something that shouldn't have been able to happen. If you've ever heard your name spoken where no one else could have spoken it, if you've ever watched the back seat move in a way that your eyes refuse to explain, please tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I don't claim to have answers. I'm only a man who drove the nights and had a strange thing happen that I can't ever make comfortable enough to live with. What I saw in the back seat still haunts me. More than the image, it's the insistence that the world may have more fissures than we expect, and that sometimes the only thing you can do is tell someone about it and see if they too felt the floor tremble. So I'll ask again, have you ever heard a name called in the dark? If you have, tell me your story. Maybe together we can at least stop being the only ones who carry it.